If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
And by the way, what you all know, but most people don't know, unlike the African-American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community with incredibly different attitudes about different things.
Brags about his ability to work with racists. June 2019. I was in a caucus with James O. Eastland and Herman Talmadge, Biden said with an attempted Southern drawl. He never called me boy, he always called me son. Well, guess what? The former vice president continued. At least there was some civility. We got things done. We didn't agree on much of anything. We got things done. We got it finished. But today you look at the other side and you're the enemy. Not the opposition, the enemy. We don't talk to each other anymore. Eastland and Talmadge were arch segregationists who opposed civil rights and saw black people as an inferior race.
Take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. That's number one. There's a consensus on that. Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally, I yield myself 3 more minutes, because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. We should focus on them now. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets. If you have a piece of crack cocaine no bigger than this quarter that I'm holding in my hand, 1/4 of $1, we passed a law through the leadership of Senator Thurmond and myself and others, a law that says if you're caught with that, you go to jail for 5 years. You get no probation. You get nothing other than 5 years in jail. Judge doesn't have a choice. Now, the fact of the matter is, we've gone from there all the way up to saying, under the leadership of Senator Thurmond, and I'd like to suggest that I take some small credit for it myself as well, and others, the presiding officer, that there is now a death penalty. And we passed it a couple years ago. If you are a major drug dealer involved in the trafficking of drugs and murder results in your activities, you go to death.
Praised Democrat segregationist as men of character 1988. On the floor of the U.S. Senate in 1988, Biden praised segregationist Sen. John Stennis D. Mississippi as a man of character even after the Democrats sought to oppose Brown v. Board of Education with something called the Southern Manifesto. In fact, Biden has even bragged about Stennis gifting him with the table the Southern Manifesto was signed on.
And to think that I would be one day on the floor of the United States Senate being paid such accolades by such a man of character and courage as John Stennis was beyond any expectation that I ever had in my wildest dreams. And I mean that sincerely.
Segregation is good for black people 1975. I think the concept of busing, that we are going to integrate people so that they all have the same access and they learn to grow up with one another and all the rest, is a rejection of the whole movement of Black Pride, is a rejection of the entire Black awareness concept, where Black is beautiful. Black culture should be studied and the cultural awareness of the importance of their own identity.
Even if the president should be impeached, history is going to question whether or not this was just a partisan lynching or whether or not it was something that, in fact, met the standard, the very high bar that was set by the founders as to what constituted an impeachable offense.
Do you believe the House of Representatives with the current Republican?
Unless we do something about this, my children are going to grow up in a jungle. The jungle being a racial jungle with tensions having built so high that it is going to explode at some point. We have got to make some move on this, Joe Biden.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
I think the two-party system, he said, although my Democratic colleagues won't like my saying this, is good for the South and good for the Negro, good for the Black in the South, Joe Biden.
The first sort of mainstream African American who was articulate and bright and clean and a nice looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook, man.
To me, for a lot of us, he was a mentor and a friend, and for a lot of us, he was a guide, Biden said at Bird's funeral. While working as a butcher in the early 1940s, Byrd formed a new chapter of the Ku Klux Klan in Sophia, West Virginia. Byrd continued his leadership role in the Klan and was eventually elected Exalted Cyclops of the local group.
My son is Attorney General a year in Iraq, came back, and that's one of the things that he finds was most in need. When he was over there in Iraq for a year, people would come to him and talk about what was happening to them at home in terms of foreclosures, in terms of bad loans that were these Shylocks who took advantage of these women and men while overseas.
Interestingly, of the 26 known Dixiecrats, 5 governors and 21 senators, only 3 ever became Republicans: Strom Thurmond, Jesse Helms, and Mills E. Godwin, Jr. Biden praised segregationist Strom Thurmond as closest friend who believed in heterogeneous, diverse society.
Look what he's doing now. He's blaming everything on China. He's blaming everything on the Chinese. He's blaming everything, and people don't make a distinction. As you well know, when a South Korean and someone from Beijing, they make no distinction. It's Asia. And that's the way he's just using it as a wedge.
Democrat Party needs more people like racist Democrat Governor George Wallace, 1975. I think the Democratic Party could stand a liberal George Wallace, someone who's not afraid to stand up and offend people, someone who wouldn't pander but would say what the American people know in their gut is right, Biden told the Philadelphia Inquirer in 1975 when discussing why liberals should not apologize for locking up criminals.
In Delaware, the largest growth in population is Indian Americans moving from India. You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking.